All right. Well, today we have Kara Furman, who's the class of 2007. So Kara, tell us about yourself. What kind of student were you like? What did you study?
I studied history at LVC. Actually, that's an oversimplification. I started as an open major, then was a historical communications major, and I don't recall if that program still exists, but it
It
was
does. It
oh,
does.
lovely. So I was historical communications for a while, and then dropped the communications and just went with plain old history degree, and also took some art history and other courses along the way that appealed for various reasons.
And so what did you, what, I mean, but what kind of, like, were you, I kind of remember, I remember you as being fairly quiet, but
I was
maybe that
fairly
was,
quiet. No, I think that's accurate. I used to be quite shy and didn't say very much. Um, that's kind of gone away in the interim, but I guess, yeah, I was quite shy. I think I was a decent student, just didn't
Mhm.
say very much.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how I remembered you, is like, like I knew your essay was always like, okay, let's put this aside. I can come to this at the end when after my spirit has been beaten down.
Exactly. Yeah.
Carol will revive me here at the end. Um, so what do you do now?
I am currently the Associate Registrar for Exhibitions at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And so that means that I coordinate all the aspects of traveling and in-house special exhibitions that the museum puts on. I don't come up with the exhibitions, curators do that, but I make all of the arrangements that facilitate the exhibition arriving, being installed, and opening. So arranging for packing, transportation, and installation of paintings, sculpture, video, art, um, all manner of drawings, photographs, all kinds of stuff. I work with lenders, art handling companies, our in-house installations team. I generate and negotiate the terms of loan agreements, arrange for fine arts insurance, and create things like installation guides and packing notes to accompany works of art. I get to work a lot with other institutions like MoMA, the Whitney, Art Institute, Tate, and sort of foster and maintain the relationships that the PMA has with those other institutions.
So that sounds pretty glamorous. Are you extremely well paid for your
So
labors?
well paid. The museum industry is famous for its high wages and great benefits. Um, no, the salaries are low, and it's a difficult field to break into. It's hard to find entry-level positions. There's a really heavy reliance on unpaid labor in the form of internships, which I am guilty of having done along the way, and would no longer recommend that folks do in order to get a foot in the door. Yeah, the salaries are low, I would say.
But there must be other things besides just getting to talk to the Whitney and um, so
Um,
what are the positives of your work life?
so, well, those are shifting in a post-COVID world, it seems. I used to travel a lot. So whenever the museum lends works of art to other institutions, we often send a staff member along with the artwork to make sure that it gets there safely, that it gets unpacked and installed correctly and
Mm-hmm.
appropriately. And so I did a fair amount of travel. That didn't happen during the pandemic, obviously. And I think we're still determining the extent to which that travel will be a part of our normal sort of quote unquote normal operations post COVID. I do have I get a lot of vacation time in lieu of salary, which is nice. 5 weeks vacation isn't too bad, but
Oh,
and the benefits are okay. They could be worse. They could be a lot better.
right. I seem to recall that you work, is it about a 7-hour day? Is that,
Our standard workday is 7 hours. Yeah, it's a 35-hour work week. So we just don't get paid for lunch, basically.
huh, okay. I mean, so that's, I could see why people want to work in that field.
Sure. It's also, I mean, it's kind of awesome to be surrounded, to work in a museum and be surrounded by cool stuff all the time.
Hmm.
It's a field that is changing quickly, that is centering diversity, equity, inclusion, and access at the moment, or attempting to center those things in its practices. And so we're seeing museums start to exhibit more artwork by women. It turns out women have been making paintings for a really long time. um,
Who knew?
who knew? Um, and also, representing queer or non-binary or transgender artists or Black artists or other traditionally underrepresented groups. And so that's sort of an exciting thing to be a part of. I've just kind of done some weird things, like um, installed 6,000-pound boulders. I've moved really big, very tall, 12-foot tall crates around the world that have paintings in them. And so there's always something weird or different happening.
Hmm.
The last exhibition I worked on is sculptures made of pantyhose and sand. So those present a different set of challenges than, say, a painting on the wall.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that's interesting or compelling about the work is that it's a little bit different all the time, even if you're going through the same process of arranging an exhibition and talking to lenders and doing all the paperwork. The stuff is different, and the stuff has its own set of needs that you have to kind of pay attention to and work through, and challenges that you have to work with other people to figure out.
So how do you move a 12-foot crate? I'm assuming there's a hand dolly or several. There's
Mostly you
something
move it
like that
really
involved.
slowly. um, Often it kind of depends where you are. Sometimes you can use a forklift or a pallet jack. Sometimes more than one pallet jack. Sometimes we do use dollies. Sometimes we sort of jack the end of the crate up with a J bar, and then get a furniture dolly basically under there.
Hmm.
Sometimes two dollies if it's really big, and then move it very slowly.
Right. So are you? So I'm sorry for all the students who are watching this. I'm just. So do you? Are you? Do you? How much of the dolly J bar kinds of things are you dealing with, or are you standing there with a clipboard while Curly and Mo, you know, like like
I'm
get their
I'm
back into it?
mostly stand there with the clipboard,
Okay.
but sometimes I do assist with the dollies and the moving of things. Mostly, I stand there with a clipboard, and um, actually, I literally usually have a clipboard in my hand, but sort of help make sure that pathways are clear and they're not going to run into anything, and that the roll-up door is lifted high enough and they're not going to smack the top of the crate off
Right.
the door. Um, uh, I do the enabling projects that allow the 12-foot crate to go wherever it needs to go.
Oh, that's very cool. And so where are the coolest places you've been
Um,
back
well,
when you could go?
I'll give a really bullshit answer, which is that oops, I'm cursing. That's probably fine.
That's
It's
okay.
I think all places are interesting, and that any place you go has something to offer. But the coolest places, um, Tel Aviv was awesome.
Mm,
Um, uh, Osaka was also super cool. If I could just eat, uh, sushi and takoyaki every day, I would probably do that. Uh, uh, I have no problem with that. Some of the coolest places I've been are these like random small towns in France that have like two restaurants, but it's owned by the guy who like catches the fish in the river in the morning and then cooks it for dinner that night. Um, those kinds of like weird places that you'd never go to unless your work made you go.
right.
um,
Okay.
that are just kind of unexpected and really surprising.
That's awesome. I mean, that really just, I'm so impressed, Kara. I mean, no, I can't even imagine, like you said, working in a museum, the Philly Museum has a nice permanent collection. And I've seen some of the visiting stuff. It's amazing. I love the Japanese room. You know,
Really,
it's very unusual. Whoever gifted or made that happen,
yeah,
it's just pretty amazing.
totally.
Wow. So so how did you when you finished school and you were in your like senior year, or you were in
Mhm.
your senior year, not like in your senior year, did you um, did you have a vision of where you were going, or is it more this kind of blind fear of, oh my God, I'm graduating now, I have to like get out of here and start earning a
Um,
living?
I I had sort of decided that what I needed to do was go to graduate school because I didn't have a super clear vision of what I wanted to do. I kind of knew that I wanted to do something with museums or historical organizations. History museum, historic house is like sort of what I was imagining.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was just trying to get to graduate school because I figured I could figure out everything else after that.
Yeah. So where'd you go?
I ended up at Northeastern University in Boston, where I got a master's degree in history with a certificate in public history.
And how was your experience in Northeastern?
It was good. The program is sort of attempts to be international in scope. So I took a weird mashup of classes without any real rhyme or reason, actually, in hindsight. Um, a few things about a few like theory courses, an African history course. I just sort of took what I wanted. The requirements were broad
Mm-hmm.
for the degree, and so I just took whatever courses were the most interesting to me at any given time, and then also took some like museums and exhibits courses,
Mm-hmm.
for the public history portion of the degree that were pretty fun, um, and also did an internship as part of the degree, an unpaid internship for which I received credit. So I actually paid to do the internship, which is an interesting concept. to,
Yep. No, we have that. We have that. That's our new. That's baked in at LVC now, which is
yeah,
very problematic. There's occasionally the paid internship, but
yeah, it's a problematic model, for sure. Um, but the internship experience that I had was really great, and helped solidify for me that I wanted to work with museum collections specifically. I didn't want to be a curator. Uh, I didn't want to do any of the other things that I was kind of toying with. Um, I wanted to work in museum collections management, and still was under the impression that I would do so at a historic house museum or a history museum or something sort of with a history focus.
Mm-hmm. And why is it that you were more interested in the collection side than, say, curating or being a docent or something?
Um, this might sound really cheesy, but whatever. Um, I was, as part of the internship, I was cataloging a portion of the collection at the Old State House Museum that had been not paid very much attention to over time. There weren't
Mm-hmm.
pictures. It wasn't fully fleshed out in their collections management database. It also happened to be a collection of scrimshaw, which is just like cool stuff anyway, like carved whale teeth and all this kind of stuff. Um, and the process of taking a thing that no one had paid attention to, paying attention to it, taking a picture of it, making sure that its location was accurately recorded and that you could find it again if you needed to, was very appealing to me. Even just like filling out the fields in the database and making something complete was very appealing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually what sort of hooked me. Um, Plus when you're handling old stuff and like doing a little bit of research about what is this hunk of metal that looks vaguely like a fish hook? Is it a fish hook or is it something else? And trying to figure out like actually what the stuff was and what it should be referred to as, dovetailed really nicely with the background that I already had, and the research skills that I already had, and the like interest in like problem solving and critical thinking. Um, and so it just sort of meshed really well for me at that moment.
That's really cool. I mean, my wife is trained as a literature person, so it's about, you read theory, you read texts, and then you read, other monographs or articles about them. So for her, like getting some historical, it could be an article or a book or somebody's letter. She's like, "You're gonna let me touch this?" So like she gets really into that, that kind of just raw excitement about something that's been basically packed away carefully for, in some cases, you're the first person to look at this in decades. In other cases, this is something we get out all the time. But she's really gets high on that. So which is kind of cool. She's like, "Do you believe they let me touch that?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's an archive. That's it. That's their
That's
job.
what they do.
That's what they do." And I guess I've become inured to that. Like, oh yeah, like, but yeah, there is something very, yeah, like the whole unraveling what is essentially a mystery. It meant something to somebody else. So how close can you get to what it meant to them, and what were they doing with it? How would it have been put together?
Totally. And I think in the case of these objects in particular, it's like, a whale tooth that some kid on a whaleboat carved and literally has like scratched a poem to his girlfriend back home into the whale tooth, and there's something really like um tangible about that, and
Mm-hmm.
like familiar, and so whale teeth hooked me, of all things.
That is pretty cool. So how did you come to the PMA?
So I finished graduate school in 2009, The economy was garbage. Museums, the cultural sector as a whole had just they did not do well in the recession, and many had lost sources of funding and had done a round of layoffs, not so dissimilar from what we saw in 2020. And so it was just really difficult to find a job. And what I ended up doing was getting a job as a visitor services assistant at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So I was selling tickets, checking coats, but slightly more optimistically, getting to know the institution and getting my foot in the door. Oddly enough, that tactic worked after some amount of time. And also in the interim, I did another internship and got an online a graduate certificate online from George Washington University in museum collections management and care. So it filled what at the time I saw as a hole in the educational background that I had for the kinds of jobs that I wanted. Because most collections management jobs, for better or for worse, currently ask for a master's degree in museum studies. And I had a related degree, but not museum studies specifically. So I added this graduate certificate, and then was able to get a temporary part-time job working in the registrar's office at the museum and transition into a permanent full-time position about 6 months later, following just some people leaving, and there were open positions.
So what, I guess there's a whole bunch of like reflection and advice that you get to offer. So people looking to move into, people who like hear your story and say, that's me, I want to work in collections, or I want to work in a museum, or, and I think, and it's, there's a steady number of people who like don't, like I'm such a ham that I always wanted to be like on stage. Like the idea of like being back was just like, ooh, who would not want to, like interpret the stuff. I want to be, that's my end. But so people who want to work in museums or this sector, what kinds of advice do you have besides don't do unpaid internships?
It's such a difficult, it's a difficult question to answer because pretty much everyone I know took some sort of weird circuitous path to the job they currently have. It can be a really difficult field to get into. There's not so many positions that come open. So many of them are term or part-time or are unpaid internships. And so it's difficult. My advice would be to not do unpaid internships if you don't have to find something paid, even if it's not the thing you think you want. Like the foot in the door thing does work. Networking works. And so that's what I would say, is to be patient with it and wait for the right opportunities. I would also say that the field is really grappling with a lot of things right now. One being a real push toward unionization, particularly on the East Coast. And particularly at large museums. And another is the incompatibility of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access goals with also requiring postgraduate degrees, sometimes multiple postgraduate degrees, and and also this path to a career that includes working for free. It really limits the types of folks who can apply for jobs, and really limits it to people who can afford to work for free for some amount of time, and who can afford to pay for graduate degrees, which are not inexpensive. And so I think as the field starts to think about, well, do you actually need a master's degree in museum studies? Is that really offering you something, or are there ways that we can take a wider, look at a wider group of folks coming out of college and just teach them those things, which are quite teachable? Are there apprenticeship models that work for certain kinds of positions? So I think things are sort of shifting, and that the kinds of behaviors that in the past seemed just part of the landscape, just things you had to do to get a job, some of that seems to be shifting in ways that I think will open it up a bit more. I'm hoping.
Yeah, I think that's really, that's very much the case with higher ed. I mean, unfortunately, you are either brilliant, but almost everybody who gets a PhD is pretty smart. But you basically have to either be just dumb lucky, or we're kind of like back to a pre-World War II model where mainly people just kind of have family money, or they're married to a doctor, and which is another way to have family money, but just, and that's not a very sustainable model, and it's certainly not a very equitable model. And then people are like, well, how we just can't hire these kinds of people, which is, yeah, anyway, there's a lot of institutional assumptions that people make that are going to hopefully be unwound. But so tell me, I guess I'm going to go back a few minutes, because you said a lot of the people that took a circuitous route, and I think almost everybody, lots of people take circuitous routes. I mean, there was in 2009 the census did a community survey of what degrees people have. I'm sorry, what jobs people have, and then related that to what degrees people have. So if you look at where people with history degrees are, like the third biggest field is just management, including funeral services, which is always I don't actually think there's a lot of people working in funeral services. I think that's just like, for some reason, the Bureau of Labor Statistics feels obligated to mention that in the past we didn't include funeral services, but now we do. And I always get a chuckle out of that.
I love that.
So but people, it's just the same, like people who are doctors, people who are medical doctors, lots of them were chemists or biology students, but by no means all. Like that's like maybe a third, or at most 40% of who goes into those fields. That it could be artists or business people or engineers or any number of other things. So share a story.
I mean, I think there's this notion that exists that like you go to school to learn a thing and then you do that thing for the rest of your life. I don't know anyone who's done that. I have I have a friend who has 2 English degrees and now works as a zookeeper. I have another friend who has a PhD in English, but has been doing marketing for various university presses and museums for the last 10 or 15 years. Actually, while she was supposed to be writing her dissertation, that's what she was doing. So I think this notion that like you study something and that there's then prescribed path for you just isn't, it's not the lived experience. I think especially for people under 40 or 45,
Mm-hmm.
it given the amount of debt that folks carry, and just the necessities of like the job market, and the way that 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 pay works right now. I think it's most people change their minds about the kind of person they want to be and what they want to do, um, and so people take paths that don't seem very logical until
Yeah.
you get some way down the line, and then you're like, oh, those 75 things that I was doing that didn't make any sense and just felt like I was cobbling something together, those all added up to where I ended up. So
Right.
success.
Right. So, so I always ask about your student loans, and I'm sorry, but so are you able to service your loans? Are you able to keep up with them?
um Sort of. So if income-based repayment did not exist, where the loan payment that you owe is calculated based on the amount of money you make, I would absolutely not be able to keep up with my loans and also house, feed, and clothe myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Thankfully, income-based repayment is a thing, and so I pay, much lower payments. That also means that I will pay on my loans until I'm like 60 or something. Um,
Aren't they supposed
uh,
to get forgiven like after 10 years or something? Or is that,
they are that program is so fraught. It's so difficult to navigate and figure out how to get into it. It also only counts. It's 120 qualifying on-time payments.
right?
So if your income is so low that you income-based repayment calculates that you owe nothing, then if you don't make payments, it doesn't count as paying for the loan. So
Got it.
um, for a long time, I owed nothing because my income was super, super low. And so for years, I wasn't making qualifying payments, even though I work for a nonprofit and therefore qualify for the loan forgiveness program. Um, I'm like halfway, basically. Um, or I was before COVID. I've made no payments. As soon as they paused those payments, I quit paying them. So I need to check back in actually about the student loan payments. Master's degrees are really expensive. It's for me, it's not undergraduate debt. It's actually graduate school debt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot of graduate programs or a lot of universities, it's, it's basically predatory, you know, and it's not like they don't teach you, but there's sort of there's no real connection between how much it costs and how much you'll earn on the other end. And that
Totally.
and then they use that money often, and they certainly did this at where I went. The the master's students were just seen as the mules that you basically everybody they just got schnooked. And then
Yeah.
the real students were the graduates, the PhD candidates, and they got schnooked, but they at least didn't have to pay for tuition and things like that.
Yeah.
So it works better if you're talking about, you know, some very highly paid like professional program. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, but that's
Yeah. I
that's
mean, I
why
think
that's why I try to discourage people at least going straight to it. Like your second master's program sounds exactly right. You get into the field, you're working, and then you sort of start to say, yeah, oh, right, here's something in this internal job market that I figured out. This is how I could make a living doing this. And then you get it. And then that usually works a little better.
Yeah, I think in the case of the cultural sector, what happened in lots of cases is that careers became more specialized, and universities made up degree programs to fit those specialized jobs. So registrars and collections managers start to become a, a more specialized, more professional field. And so then universities make museum studies departments where there were none. They didn't exist until really the last 20 years or so. And they're just churning out master's students who aren't getting funding from the school, who sometimes, in my case, there was like a vague promise of funding. Like, you got to come here, you do well, then you'll qualify for funding. I got 2 semesters out of 4 funded, with no clarity around when or how that funding was decided, or whether it would happen the following semester or not.
Right.
And I think predatory is absolutely the right word, for master's programs in particular.
So I have like maybe a couple more questions, and then so like, what advice do you have for students in terms of either things to do, things not to do? Or
In terms of graduate school, be intentional about the decision to go to grad school, about what you study, and be realistic about what the outcomes are, and don't just take the word of the school. Don't so Northeastern said, oh, we have a 100% job placement rate, and then upon additional questions it was, oh, well, that's just the students that we're in touch with, the ones who've
right.
gotten back to us about what they do. There's no way that they have a 100% placement rate following graduation. That's ridiculous. But schools want to represent themselves as being a sure thing. You'll get this degree, then you'll get a job, and you'll make money. So just be realistic about what your job prospects are, what your likely salary is. Find some salary information. It's out there. There's a move towards salary transparency. The American Association of Museums does a salary survey every year. So does the Association of Art Museum Directors, where they actually publish the average salaries for institutions of varying budget sizes regionally across the country. So you can look at large museums in the Northeast and see what the average salary by job title is. And it's really useful for seeing what's likely, and also, once you have a job, whether you're underpaid compared to your peers, which is useful.
That's very cool. That's very, very cool. So what parts of your degree from LVC, like what kinds of things do you use?
I use primarily, as much as it's knowledge, it's like soft skills is the right word, but like research and critical thinking skills. So the ability to take in information, digest it, think about it, and respond thoughtfully with a solution to a problem or a way forward is primarily, I think, what I got. But that's 90% of what I do on any given day, is take in information, reconstitute it, and spit it back out, or use it to make a decision about something. plus I learned to write well enough to communicate like difficult concepts to other people in a way that makes sense to them. And that's super useful too.
Yeah, very cool.
Totally.
So anyway, it's wonderful to see your face, and you know, like I say, if you come through town, please look us up, and then I'll be back in contact in terms of whether or not to, you know, like whether or not to bring you in for a Q&A session, or whether to just like I'll direct students to you. But
Cool.
anyway, so
I'm
thanks so
happy
much for
to
your
answer
time.
questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Of
thanks
course.
so much.
Of
Have a
course.
good one. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.